Randonautica was all the rage that summer. Everyone seemed to be using it to explore mysterious locations, guided by nothing more than a random set of coordinates and their intentions. Some people found breathtaking scenery, while others discovered strange, eerie places. For a group of friends, Ben, Sarah, and Mia, it was just another thrilling way to spend an otherwise dull Saturday afternoon. They downloaded the app, set their intention to find something unsettling, and waited for the coordinates. Soon, the app provided a destination, a location in the middle of a vast, wooded area just outside their town. The three of them exchanged excited glances. They had heard all the rumors about the app leading users to bizarre discoveries, but none of them believed the supernatural tales. They hopped into Ben's car and began the drive toward the unknown. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew heavier, and the once blue sky turned a muted gray, casting a dim shadow over the trees. After nearly an hour, they reached the spot indicated by Randonautica, a clearing that seemed unremarkable at first glance. "This is it?" Mia asked, her voice dripping with disappointment. The clearing was empty, save for a few scattered rocks and an old, moss-covered tree. The wind was still, and even the birds seemed to avoid the area. The quiet was unsettling. "Let's at least explore a bit," Ben suggested. None of them wanted to admit it, but they felt a growing sense of unease. Despite their earlier skepticism, something about the place seemed off. As they wandered around, Sarah noticed something odd near the base of the mossy tree. "Hey, check this out," she called. Sticking out from the earth was a small, rusted metal box, almost completely obscured by dirt and leaves. They worked together to dig it up, curiosity now overpowering their unease. When they finally pried the box open, they found something far more chilling than they had anticipated. A collection of Polaroid photographs, each one showing different parts of the clearing they were standing in, but from various points in time. The dates, scrawled on the back of the photos, were from decades earlier. "What the hell?" Ben muttered, flipping through the images. One photo showed the same clearing, but there was a figure in the background, standing near the tree. The next photo showed the same figure, only closer. Each successive photo depicted the figure moving closer to the camera, its features growing clearer. The last photo froze them in terror. It showed the three of them, Ben, Sarah, and Mia, standing in the clearing, staring down at the box they had just opened. The Polaroid was brand new, and the ink was still drying. "How is this even possible?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. They had only just found the box, but somehow it contained a photograph of them in the exact moment they were living. The air suddenly grew cold, and they felt a presence behind them. Ben turned slowly, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing just beyond the tree was a figure, the same one from the photographs, its body obscured by shadows, but its face was pale, hollow, and completely featureless. Panic set in. "We need to leave. Now!" Sarah shouted, backing away. But as they started to run, the ground beneath them shifted, as if the earth itself was alive. The once solid ground felt spongy and unstable, pulling at their feet. They made it back to the car, hearts racing, and peeled out of the clearing as fast as possible. None of them dared look back, but they could feel the weight of something watching them. The sensation lingered long after they left the woods. Back at Ben's house, they tried to shake off the fear. "It was just a trick of the light," Ben said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Someone's probably messing with us." Sarah wasn't convinced. She pulled out the Polaroid they had taken with them. "What about this? It's us. It's right now." As they stared at the photo, they realized something even more terrifying. In the background of the image, standing behind them, was the figure. It had followed them. Terrified, they decided to destroy the photograph and forget the whole thing. But as Ben went to tear it, the lights in the house flickered. A cold draft swept through the room, and they heard a soft, distorted whisper, as if someone was calling their names from far away. The figure was no longer in the photograph. In the weeks that followed, strange things continued to happen. They all started having vivid nightmares, waking up with scratches and bruises they couldn't explain. Mia began hearing footsteps in her apartment at night, despite living alone. Ben's car alarm would go off at random times, and once he found the doors wide open, though he knew he had locked them. Sarah's reflection in mirrors seemed to move independently, its expression distorted and wrong. Desperate to escape, they reached out to others who had used Randonautica, hoping someone might have answers. They found a small, dark corner of the internet where people shared similar stories, tales of strange figures, bizarre coincidences, and hauntings that didn't stop after leaving the app's designated locations. The app had opened a door to something far beyond their understanding, something that now had its eyes on them. They hadn't just gone randonauting for a thrill. They had made contact with the unseen, and it wasn't letting them go. The moral of the story is simple. Curiosity, when untamed, can lead you to places you were never meant to go. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Not everything in the world is meant to be found, and once you do, it might start finding you. As their lives spiraled into deeper terror, Ben, Sarah, and Mia would learn the hard way. Not all adventures end where they begin. Some continue long after you think they're over. It started innocently enough. Jenna, Kyle, and Rachel were bored on a humid Friday night, scrolling through TikTok when they stumbled upon a viral trend, Randonautica. The app, promising to take users to random, often eerie locations based on their intentions, piqued their curiosity. They watched videos of people encountering the unexplainable, abandoned houses, strange symbols, and unnerving coincidences. Feeling adventurous, they downloaded the app, eager to see where it would lead them. "Let's set the intention to find something spooky," Jenna suggested with a mischievous grin. "How about dark mystery?" Kyle added. Rachel, the most cautious of the group, hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to end up in the middle of nowhere." Kyle reassured her, "Come on, it's just for fun. What's the worst that could happen?" Jenna typed in the intention, dark mystery, and the app generated coordinates. It wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive to a location on the outskirts of town, near the woods. They piled into Kyle's car, laughing nervously, as the reality of what they were about to do set in. As they drove, the landscape changed from suburban streets to winding, dimly lit roads flanked by towering trees. The laughter faded, replaced by uneasy silence. The destination marker on Jenna's phone grew closer, the sense of dread growing with it. "We're almost there," Jenna said, her voice quieter now. They pulled onto a narrow dirt road, barely wide enough for the car. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches like skeletal hands reaching toward the vehicle. They finally arrived at the coordinates, and Kyle turned off the engine. Silence descended. "Why is it always the woods?" Rachel muttered, gripping the door handle tightly. The app's coordinates led them to an overgrown trail. No buildings or lights were in sight, just a path disappearing into the trees. "We came this far, might as well see what's out there," Kyle said, trying to sound brave. They got out of the car, the air thick with humidity and the faint scent of pine. Flashlights in hand, they followed the trail, their footsteps crunching on the dry leaves and twigs below. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It felt as if the woods were alive, watching them, waiting. After 10 minutes of walking, Jenna suddenly stopped. "Do you guys hear that?" They all paused, straining their ears. At first, there was nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then, faintly, the sound of whispering. It was barely audible, like distant voices carried on the wind. "Maybe it's just the wind," Kyle suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. They pressed on, but the whispering grew louder. It seemed to come from all around them, impossible to pinpoint. Rachel's breathing quickened. "We should go back. This doesn't feel right." Jenna agreed, her initial excitement replaced by unease. Just as they turned to leave, Rachel's flashlight caught something in the distance, an old dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. Its windows were boarded up, the wood rotting and covered in vines. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. "Do we check it out?" Kyle asked, though his voice wavered. Jenna swallowed hard. "Let's just take a quick look and then leave." The whispering grew louder as they approached the cabin, now discernible as fragmented voices, but the words were incomprehensible. They stepped onto the creaky porch, and the air seemed to thicken with a sense of dread. Kyle reached for the doorknob. It turned with an unnatural ease, as if the door had been waiting for them. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, empty room. The smell hit them first, a pungent, sickly odor of decay. Rachel gagged, covering her mouth. Inside, the room was barren, except for a single wooden chair in the center, facing them. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in. Rachel screamed, banging on the door. "Open it! Open it!" Kyle fumbled for the flashlight, his hands shaking. When he turned it on, the beam fell on something etched into the walls, symbols crudely carved into the wood. They were unfamiliar, almost ancient-looking. "What the hell is this?" Jenna whispered, backing away from the walls. The whispering had grown louder, surrounding them, but there was something else now, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the shadows. "We need to get out of here," Kyle shouted. Suddenly, the chair in the center of the room moved. It scraped across the floor slowly, the sound chilling in the stillness. Then, from the corner of the room, a figure emerged. It was barely human, a shadowy, emaciated shape with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Rachel screamed, and Kyle lunged for the door. He yanked it open, and they bolted out, running blindly down the path they had come from. The whispering and growling followed them, like a dark presence pushing them to flee. They didn't stop until they reached the car, hearts pounding, gasping for breath. Kyle fumbled with the keys, finally managing to start the engine. As they sped away, Rachel glanced back. The figure stood at the edge of the woods, watching them, its hollow eyes burning into her memory. No one spoke on the drive back. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the hum of the car engine. When they reached town, they parked in silence, too shaken to say anything. The next day, Jenna checked the Randonautica app again, curious to see if others had been led to the same place. She found nothing, no mention of the cabin, no reports of the strange figure. It was as if it had never existed. The moral of the story? Curiosity can lead you to dark places, but some doors are better left unopened. Some mysteries should remain unsolved. They never used the app again. It started as an ordinary Friday night for Zoe and her two friends, Dylan and Maria. They were bored, searching for something exciting to do when Dylan suggested using the Randonautica app. The app had recently gone viral for leading people to strange and unexplainable locations, often aligned with their thoughts or intentions. Although they had heard a few unsettling stories, they were skeptical. That is, until that night. Zoe was the first to object. She had heard of some users finding bizarre things, like unmarked graves and strange creatures in the woods. Still, Maria and Dylan laughed it off, calling her superstitious. Peer pressure did its work, and soon Zoe found herself in the back seat of Dylan's car. The app loaded, and their intention set: adventure. The app dropped a pin about 30 minutes outside of town, deep into a forest known as Black Hollow. The forest had a dark reputation, a place where people often got lost or heard eerie noises in the dead of night. Nevertheless, Dylan steered the car toward the coordinates, excited for what they might discover. Maria buzzed with nervous laughter, and Zoe sat in uneasy silence. As they reached the dirt road leading into Black Hollow, the streetlights became fewer and far between, eventually disappearing altogether. The trees loomed overhead like silent guardians of a terrible secret, casting shadows that danced and flickered in the headlights. Dylan drove cautiously, following the app's directions, until they reached a narrow, overgrown path that looked like it hadn't been traveled in years. "This is it," Dylan said, pulling the car over to the side of the road. "I don't like this," Zoe murmured, but it was too late. Maria was already out of the car, dragging her along. The trio followed the app's directions, trekking deeper into the woods, their flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. The air was unnervingly still. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects, just the sound of their footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. "Are we sure this is safe?" Zoe asked, her voice shaking. "Oh, come on, what's the worst that could happen?" Dylan responded with a grin, though his eyes darted nervously around the trees. As they approached the final location, their phones pinged in unison, indicating they had arrived. But there was nothing remarkable about the spot, just trees, dirt, and silence. Maria groaned in disappointment. "Maybe we didn't think of a strong enough intention," Dylan mused. Zoe, however, felt a sense of dread washing over her. Something was wrong. The woods felt off. She strained her ears, listening for anything, any sign of life. That's when she heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping sound, almost like the beating of a drum, coming from the direction they had just walked from. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her eyes wide. Dylan and Maria froze, their expressions quickly turning from curiosity to fear. The tapping grew louder, as if something or someone was approaching. Then came a low whisper, barely audible, carried by the wind. "Leave." Maria's flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the trees. Suddenly the tapping stopped, and in the silence that followed, they heard something even more horrifying, a soft rustling, like fabric dragging across the ground. Zoe's heart pounded in her chest. "We need to go. Now." But before anyone could move, Maria's flashlight caught something in the distance, a figure standing among the trees. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, his features obscured by the shadows. His body seemed unnaturally still, and though he was far away, they could see his head slowly tilting to the side as if observing them. "Who's there?" Dylan called out, his voice cracking. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stared with that eerie tilt of the head. A cold breeze swept through the forest, and with it came a sharp, metallic smell, like rust or blood. Zoe gagged, covering her mouth, but before they could react, the figure took a step forward. "Run!" Zoe screamed, and they bolted back toward the car. The woods seemed to close in on them as they ran, the branches reaching out like skeletal hands. That same whisper followed them, growing louder, angrier. "Leave! Leave!" Dylan reached the car first, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He got the door open just as Maria and Zoe arrived, breathless and terrified. They all scrambled inside, slamming the doors shut. Dylan floored the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, speeding down the dirt road. None of them dared look back, but Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was following them. The whispers had stopped, but the heavy sense of dread remained. They didn't stop driving until they were well outside of Black Hollow, the bright lights of the town in the distance. Only then did they pull over, panting and wide-eyed. "What the hell was that?" Maria asked, her voice trembling. No one had an answer. Later that night, after they had returned home, Zoe's phone buzzed with a notification. She opened Randonautica, and her blood ran cold. It was a message. "You've arrived." The app's coordinates were still marked in Black Hollow, but beneath them was a new message. "Come back soon." Moral: some doors should remain closed, and curiosity can lead you to places where you don't belong. When you seek adventure, be careful. Something might be waiting for you on the other side, and it may not want to let you go.